And thanks everybody for coming. Good to meet us chat. So I don't actually have a script as such, and hopefully that's not a bad sign, but I do have a book here, and I'm going to be referring to, because most of what I'm going to be saying today is based on an article which I published in 2006, the Fadgies, an Irish-speaking colony in 19th century Belfast, in a book called Belfast and the Irish Language. And I have some copies actually, but I'll talk to you about that later on if anyone's interested. But essentially, I was talking to Stephen earlier on and was saying that I hadn't actually been to the new building, much to my shame, but I used to go to the old PRONI building quite a lot. About 2003 when I started researching the Fadgies, and really my interest in the Fadgies, and first of all explain who and what the Fadgies were. These were Irish speakers from Omeath who settled in Belfast in the 19th century, and they were all fish and fruit sellers, as I say, from Omeath in County Louth, and they were known as the Fadgies in Belfast. The explanation given by someone called Sean McMillan, who we'll be speaking about shortly, who was a Gaelic scholar, a writer, quite a famous figure in the Irish revival as well, and he knew a lot of the people from Omeath. He also spent a lot of time in Omeath and also with the Omeath people who were based in Belfast, and his theory was that the name Fadgie came from people addressing each other a Fadgie. So in Irish you aspirate a person's name when you're addressing them, so it's a Moira becomes a Moira, and that's why in Scotland Seamus, Hamish, the name Hamish comes from that, from the vocative case. So that was his theory, and when I looked at the street directory for Charlemont Street, which is one of the streets where the people from Omeath were particularly sort of predominant in, there were a lot of Patricks, and so it does make sense that people would hear one another saying a Fadgie. There is another possible explanation, that's a patronymic, or one of these names that is given to a family, particularly in a rural district. So for example, you have the Barney Joes, or my brother's wife is called O'Kane, which is from Swadra in County Derry, so there's O'Kanes all over the place, and they're known as the Child O'Kanes, that's their family nickname. So there are family names in Omeath, such as like the Owen Fadgies and this type of thing. Because I actually gave a talk in Omeath a few weeks ago, and I was talking to people from Omeath about that, and they were saying that's certainly true. So those are the two theories on why the name Fadgies came to us anyway. So I'm not sure how long this talk is going to last, but I think there's 30 slides, and most of them are pictures, and my intention here is to be reasonably informal, but to talk you through the research that I've done, and the potential for future research as well. So this is Crooked Lane in Belfast, and it's a photograph from the Ulster Museum, and it's hard to give a date to. I think it's around the 1880s. It's an interesting photograph, probably because of the hat on the left hand side, which is unfortunately blurred a bit. But you see St Mary's Chapel Lane there at the bottom of the street, and this is your way in towards Smithfield, and this is where most of the Catholic population who settled in Belfast were based. And of course the first Catholic church there, St Mary's, as well. And this is where the people from Omeath tended to, this is the area where the people from Omeath tended to predominate, as I say, when they settled. My God, we're sort of being uncharacteristically punctual, starting at 1 o'clock, so don't be anybody worrying if you're slightly late. It's normally that I'm the person that's late anyway. So, but as I say, this is where people from a sort of Catholic background tended to settle in Belfast in the 19th century. And of course, one of the big things for sort of population shifts and sort of migration in the 19th century was, of course, a famine, and you see a big sort of increase in the rate of people moving towards Belfast from Omeath, as well as from other parts, obviously, directly after the famine. So. Now, cadgers, pavies, dealers in South East Ulster. The word pavy now is synonymous with things like pavy points, so it's a travelling community. Pavying was really somebody, particularly a dealer in cloth. Cadgers were people who dealt particularly fish and fruit, and there's a path going from Omeath down to Dundalk called the Cadger's Pad, and this is where people went from Omeath down to Dundalk. Now, the idea of dealing, and say the Fadgies, people from Omeath, when they came to Belfast, this is their occupation. Other people went to work in the mills, factories and so on, in which case they were probably in some ways anonymous, but the people from Omeath were dealers. They were out on the streets. They also had carts which were very brightly painted, because they're basically like the modern day poke van, where you want to attract people's attention to your wares, and they also were right through the city. And so they were a relatively small group of people, but they had a large profile, even the fact that they were given a nickname. I mean, I don't know, there are many people who came to Belfast from County Tyrone in the 19th century, but how many of these sort of communities were given a nickname, a particular nickname? I think that speaks in a way about their profile, because they were people who were very visible. They were out and about, they were out in throughout the city, and as I say, it gives them a certain profile. But anyway, the tradition of dealing goes way back in South East Ulster, and the poet Cathal Bui McGilligunna, who's associated with Breffni or County Cavan, but also with what we call Uriel, the area in North Louth, South Down, South Armagh, North Monaghan, which was called Uriel or Uriel in Irish. I mentioned Breffni, that's another ancient sort of territorial division. And in this particular area, as I say, Cathal Bui McGilligunna was said to have spent a lot of his time. So McGilligunna mentions going to Loch Gaeilge, so I see a spelling there, Loch Gaeilge, with goods, agus mé gimalt go lahari go Loch Gaeilge. So, and this is going to be sometime in the first half of the 18th century. Now, the geographer Eston Evans, he has several articles, one on the Pavies of Slieve Gullion. He's another article on the Mourns district, where he mentions the people from Omeath, and so he was discussing Paving in the 20th century. Now, if we go back to the 19th century, there's evidence given to the Devon Commission in 1844. The 19th century Victorian administrations were very fond of these commissions of inquiry and so on, and one of these was in 1844, the Devon Commission, and this was the evidence given by the priest of Cregan parish in South Armagh. So he says, this is in 1844, he says, "It's not by farming the people live, but by dealing. They look upon their holdings or little farms as rather a lodging and resting place, and they pay rent chiefly by dealing. They go to England to labour, and many of them purchase various articles and go through the country with them, such as oranges and lemons. Others buy pigs, cattle, etc., and exchange goods in various ways." So you have this situation then where people in South Armagh, they do the labour, but they come back with these goods and so on. Now, if you look at Donegal in the 19th century, or Connemara, there's big exodus to Scotland, particularly from Donegal, and it's all agricultural work, it's all working in the farms. And indeed, I mean, if you go around Donegal now, the Donegal Gaeltacht, when people speak English, you'd swear, you were in the Gorbals, and there's a huge connection there between Donegal and Scotland still. Interestingly, a lot of people from Munster went to the mining towns of Wales, and there's evidence that there's a scholar from Cardiff University who has written a book on the Irish in Wales, and he talks about evidence from his own family being trilingual, having English, Welsh and Irish, so places like Mountshire. There's actually an interesting story as well. It's not a story, but it's actually an interesting fact. There was an Italian priest called Father Signini who actually created a phrase book from Irish to Italian to hear confessions, and this is one of the sources of information that we get about the Irish diaspora in industrial cities, is the priests who were administering to them, and particularly the priests who were hearing confessions, because this was something. I'll return to that point later on, but it's an interesting source of information in that it was very important for people to have their confession heard, and the language which they needed in that case was Irish. So you had so some of the priests who, for example, in the Black Country in West Midlands in England, they would have been dealing with their parishioners. There were people there who had no English but only Irish, and this was an extremely important duty of theirs, was to be able to hear their confessions in Irish and so on. So but anyway, getting back to dealing and this tradition of dealing in South East Ulster, this is, I think, is an interesting piece of evidence from the mid-19th century. So it's not just Omeath, but it's South Armagh, and so the Oriel district, you might say. But an important thing is, as I say, is that unlike people, say for example from Donegal, who went labouring and navying particularly, and working in farms and so on in Scotland, people from Omeath tended to go out dealing right through Ireland, and not just Ireland, but also England, Canada as well. And Eston Evans has a very good story about meeting someone from South Armagh in Canada who had actually a cap made with SS, or was it HMS Slieve Gullion, and he was basically masquerading as a ship's captain, and the whole idea was like, I'm just off this ship and I have a whole load of whatever, but he wasn't ship's captain at all, But so there was the bit of the Dale Boy Trotter, I suppose, involved in that story. Anyway, into Belfast then, as I said, the famine is probably the big factor, because you have people from Omeath before the famine in Belfast, but there's a really noticeable increase in the number of people who have come into Belfast from Omeath in the time after the famine. In my research, what I did was basically, it wasn't rocket science at all. What I did was I looked at the street directories, and I went through the census returns, and I compared those with Griffith's householders index and so on, and the surnames matched basically. There's a small population in Omeath and the same surnames. So you get these surnames like, for example, Daly, Donnelly, McGivern, McKeown, McManus, McShane, O'Hagan, O'Hanlon, Traynor, Rice. These are surnames that all come up. The other one is Elmore as well as another one. So, but you see this picture. Okay, I chose this one, 1886, Waiting for the Island Men, Carrickhill Riots, and Carrickhill Belfast Riots, 1886. So obviously Belfast wasn't any ordinary city. It was a city in which there was quite a lot of sectarian strife and turmoil. The interesting thing I think about the Fadgies is, and the people from Omeath, is that they were right through the city, and they had a fairly big presence in East Belfast as well. Actually, when I gave a talk in Omeath, there was a lady there from East Belfast who was pointing out, some of the Green Ore Street, and there's Omeath Street in East Belfast as well. And in my own research, there were shops, and in round about, I think it was Templemore Avenue, around about that district, and other parts of East Belfast. Interestingly, I'll go on to this in greater detail later, but there was a man called Thomas O'Hanlon, whose granddaughter I spoke to. Sadly, she died about 10 years ago. But anyway, she was telling me that her grandfather used to go out to Palace Barracks with fruit, and what he did was he used to swap the fruit with for the military boots that the soldiers had. So see, it was kind of like, it wasn't just money or whatever. It was whatever you were going to sell. They were very, very versatile, very, very adaptable. But it just shows a lot of initiative as well, I think. Anyway, the Irish language in Omeath. So obviously, this is something that I know there are classes on this week, and there's a series of Irish language talks. The whole Oriel area is extremely rich in its literary oral tradition. Not, the Cooley Mountains, of course, is the setting for the greatest Irish epic, the Time Bá Cúailnge, the Cattle Rail of Cooley. But you also have poets like Seamus Dal MacCurta, who kind of spanned the late 17th and the beginning of the 18th century, and probably the most important Ulster poet in a period which was extremely important for the Irish language. You know, the 18th century poets. We talk about the Ashling poets from Munster, but the southeast Ulster poets, of which there were many in the 18th century and right through the 19th century. Seamus Dal McCurta, who is associated very closely with Omeath, would be the most important of these. So anyway, we could talk a lot about that literary tradition, but Omeath is no ordinary place, I think, in terms of the history of the Irish language and the Irish language literary tradition. But by 1896 we have a report here from the Belfast Gaelic League excursion to Omeath. And these were all, in 1896 the Gaelic League were very much well-to-do people. They were quite a mix as well. You had people like R.R. Kane, who was the Orange Lodge Grand Master, and he was a member of the sort of original committee of the Gaelic League, which was founded, the Belfast branch was founded the year before this trip in 1895. But anyway, they were, generally speaking, the well-to-do. So here's a report. Mr. Hussey reported that he and other members visited Omeath on the 3rd of August and found that the people generally in favour of the language, though it was noticeable that the younger people are growing up in ignorance of it. A visit was also paid to Cushendall, County Antrim, where the residents appeared to be enthusiastic about it. On the 15th of August, 4 members went to Draperstown to inquire into the state of the language in that district and found it was spoken pretty generally. So you can see here the sort of decline of Irish among the young people in Omeath by the late 1890s. Now, J.P. Mahaffey, here's another wee piece. J.P. Mahaffey was the provost of Trinity College, Dublin. He was a very well-known figure in 19th century Ireland. He was a big influence on Oscar Wilde, for example. He was no fan of the Irish language. When there was an inquiry into the Irish language in the intermediate education, he came out strongly against the idea of Irish being included in the school syllabuses and so on. And he articulates a lot of his views in an essay called "The Recent Fuss About the Irish Language," which is just interesting that he mentions. "I have heard buying and selling in Irish and Dundalk, whither the inhabitants of Slieve Gaeilge, County Armagh, and of Omeath, County Louth, used to gather." Okay, so now Patrick Pearse, who probably doesn't need any introduction, talks about in 1903 the methods of Mr. Ward, the teacher in Ardahi Male School in the parish of Omeath, show how far a teacher, even in a district which is practically an anglicised one, can travel in the direction Irish programme for primary schools we suggest. So it's interesting, that phrase, practically an anglicised district. That's a very strong kind of statement, I suppose. But it shows at the same time that there was at least one teacher there who was, with a limited sort of resources, was trying to change the tide of it. But we'll have to sort of take a caveat here. I think just going to, just show you this picture while we're talking about this. This is Pearse and others in amongst them, Mary Hayden, the Professor of Irish in UCD here. But this is Willie Pearse as well, who was executed alongside, well, at the same week as Patrick Pearse, who was in the middle with the bowler hat. Pearse, as a young man, seemed to favour this kind of dandified sort of dress. But anyway, this is him in 1905. The thing really that's interesting, I suppose, is that Pearse is talking about Omeath being essentially an anglicised district, but there's a big difference between the part of Omeath that's on the shore and the mountainous part of Omeath. And if you talk to people from Omeath, they'll tell you that the people in the higher townlands kept the Irish language a lot later than the people by the shore. Okay, so that's interesting, and I think that some of these people that came on excursions probably didn't really venture much further than the sort of the harbour area. Okay, but there was a revival happening at the same time, and this is the best example of it, I suppose. In 1912, there was a college founded in Omeath, College of Gaeilge, and unfortunately in 1926 it was decided that basically this wasn't a suitable place for an Irish college, and the new Free State government, would prefer to spend money on an Irish college elsewhere. So the Gaelic League, Father Lorcan O'Murray and Sean McMullen took a decision that the college should be relocated in Ranafast, and we have a very famous Irish college there from that time, 1926, which took the same name, College of Regia, Ranafast. But some people are probably familiar with writers like Shosha McGreena from Ranafast, and Shosha McGreena was one of the teaching staff at the Irish College in Omeath for a while, as well as Sean McMullen, who we'll be talking about shortly. So, just one other point then on the Irish language in Omeath at this time. Padraig O'Connor, who was the writer whose statue was for many years in Eyre Square in Galway, he in 1916 visited Omeath and basically said the Irish language, the same conclusion as Pearse, essentially the Irish language didn't have a future in Omeath. He was much more optimistic actually about Tyrone, places that he visited around, but Gortin, for example. But as I say, the point is, we must remember the townlands by the shore in Omeath were much quicker to lose the language than the higher grounds. And just last point probably on College of Regia. This is a picture, quite a few students from Belfast at Omeath in 1916, and the person on the right is a priest called Father Donald O'Toole. And this picture was given to me by my old Irish teacher, Colin, his sister Colin Beckett, and this is his mother. And they were a family. Father was a teacher, and mother spoke Irish as well. So they would have been very much involved in the Gaelic League at the start of the 20th century. And anyway, okay. Now the last native speaker. So just really finishing off this part of the talk where I'm dealing with the Irish language in Omeath. And the last native speaker from Omeath, Annan Ianlon, was accorded by RT in 1962 when she was 90 years of age. Okay, so this means then that she would have been born in about 1872, I suppose. And it's interesting, we had earlier the Belfast Gaelic League saying in 1896 that the young people were mostly ignorant of Irish. Well, this woman was recorded in 1962 and her Irish was very, very good. But she was reckoned to be the last native speaker from Omeath. Now, is Brendan Rice here? Brendan, how are you? So, Brendan and I have been speaking. Brendan, hopefully that's your father's. Is it Vincent? Is that right? Hugh. Sorry, right. So that's my mistake. But Brendan and I were speaking. This is probably a couple of months ago, I think now, on the phone. And maybe at the end of this talk, or if you want to say anything at this stage, Brendan's father. It's a very interesting story in that he was sent. In about 1921, 1920, yes. 1920, when he was about 7 years of age, was it?
That's right, yeah.
And so he was sent down to live with his. Do you want to go ahead there, Brendan, if you can explain?
Unfortunately, my grandfather came from the town of Ardaghy.
Yes.
And he went to Belfast, I think, in 1905.
Yeah.
And he had a fruit shop on the Grosvenor Road at the corner of Turin Street.
Uh-huh.
But unfortunately, they were burned out in 1920.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, Lord rest my grandmother, whose wife died at childbirth in December 1920. And my father was an only son of my grandfather's, and he had two sisters, but the two sisters were put into care with a couple of aunts. And my father was sent to Omeath, to what he told me was his Aunt Judy, up in the townland of Ardaghy. And whenever he came back to Belfast in about 1930, he was sent there in 1920, he said he had to learn to speak English again because his Aunt Judy taught and spoke to him in Irish up to 1930.
There you go. And your father died in 2002.
That's right.
Well, I'm glad I got that part right. I'll change as you were speaking. I'm sorry about that. But I think that's a fascinating story because I didn't know, and this is a great thing about talks like this as well, is that and talking on Meath, there was people came forward with very interesting information, and it's fascinating to think that your father was really a native speaker of some sort, really, from Omeath when you think about it, and the fact that he died only in 2002,
I remember when we walked up and down the Falls Road in the 50s and 60s, he stopped and spoke to people in Gaelic, and I used to be embarrassed at times. I played for the Rossa, and he was on the sideline and he used to shout, "Bull or Rash, strike again."
Yeah.
We were playing hurling.
Yeah.
So he continued the language right through until his death.
It's fantastic, really, because it's a pity just we didn't get a recording of him speaking Irish, but to know that that he was basically a native speaker with that particular Irish, because once the Irish language died in Omeath, that was it. That particular form of Irish went with it, and the rest is it's recordings, and it's the good thing is that there's a very, very strong branch of the Gaeilge League, Conor Gaeilge, in Omeath now, and they have a house in sort of very close to the harbour there, and there's an Irish medium school, and so there's a lot of interest in the Irish language, and hopefully they'll be able to change the fortunes. Sorry, Bryn.
Hugh Rice was my grandfather.
Oh,
My
right.
father was Lawrence Rice.
Lawrence, right? Okay, so I'm going to change that now because it.
But apparently Lawrence and Hugh were very popular names in the Cooley Mountain area.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I've come across Lawrence. Go ahead.
Sorry to annoy you again. But my father would be very annoyed with the W. It should
Do you know something? I thought of that and I thought to myself, I'll just write it probably. But is that it? L-A-U? L-A-U-R-E-N. Alright, okay. So, right. Okay, thanks very much. Well, as I say, so Brendan, thanks very much. I mean, I think that's a fascinating story, really. It just it extends the lifetime of Omeath Irish a lot further than what we thought, because previously we thought it was the 1960s.
I have some photographs for you here.
Great.
So, of my grandfather, who came from Ardagh. He's standing outside his fruit shop at 105 Falls Road facing the Dunville Park.
Fantastic, yeah. Well, we don't have one of these, some of these places, or do you have some? Great.
Maybe if you're at the end of it.
Maybe, yeah. If Stephen, if you take the photographs of Brendan, then we'll show them at the end. Is that okay? Because I think it would be good to end up with a discussion of your father and grandfather, Brendan. So thanks very much. Now it doesn't often happen that you get new material as you speak, And sorry for the numerous corrections there that I had to make. So, but anyway, so. Talking a wee bit about Fadgies then. Cathal O'Byrne, whose history, as I roved out, is it's a classic of the history of Belfast. He talks about the Fadgies. He says, until demolished to make room for the post office extension, the lime-washed slated houses in Charlemont Street were occupied mainly by a group of people who sold fish, oysters, and occasionally great golden slabs of honeycomb carried on a huge dish that was balanced by a sugan on the vendor's head. These people were all from Omeath and were Gaelic speakers almost to a man, so that until recently there was in the heart of Belfast an Irish-speaking colony, the men of which were referred to as the Fadgies. And there's different spelling there. I've gone for Shannon McMillan's spelling, Fadgie, F-A-D-G-I-E. So anyway, Cathal O'Byrne's description is interesting. He also talks as well about a diary. A friend of his, it was his grandfather's diary, and he talks about old people praying in Irish in St Mary's Chapel Lane, and he says that some of these were Fadgies from Omeath, and that they had these glass rosary beads, as you say, and they were saying their prayers in Irish, which fits into the thing I was saying earlier on about the role of priests and confession and so on. But anyway, so this is Cathal O'Byrne. So this is a photograph which kind of gives you an area pretty close to Charlemont Street. Charlemont Street was basically ran from Bank Street down to Garfield Street, and it was essentially Castle Court was built on top of Charlemont Street. Actually, when I was talking to my father about this, father is 86. So when he started working, he used to be said he worked in Wordies on the Grosvenor Road, and he would be sent on messages occasionally down to the post office. And I was asking him, have you ever heard of a place called what was it I was calling it? Charmount or Charlie Mount or something. I was going, oh, Charlemont Street, yes. He was saying, yes, Charlemont Street was there, but there wasn't really anything there. It was at the back of the post office. Charlemont Street was demolished in the early 1890s as part of the sort of slum clearances, and what happened then was people kind of dispersed a bit, but there were a lot of some of the streets. I'll just give you some of the names here. Torrance Market, Torrance Row, particularly Black's Lane. These are all streets in this sort of kind of Smithfield area where you'll get, if you go through the street directions, you'll see, you know, Patrick Daly, fish dealer, and then you'll get, you know, say maybe Lawrence O'Hanlon or something, fruit dealer and so on. And so all these people, they lived together in the same streets and they worked together in the same trade. I spoke to, actually, similar to Braden's story, I spoke to a man called Pat Dobbin down in Meath a few years ago, and he was telling me how his grandfather and his two brothers used to come down from Bavin, the townland called Bavin in Omeath, and he actually showed me the cart. The cart had a brass plate, and it was you know, Patrick Dobbin, fish dealer, and it was a sort of a picture of a fish as well on it, you know. But he actually renovates these old carts. And what he was explaining to me was that, as I said earlier, you know, they painted them up so that they were very brightly coloured, so that they attracted people in. The other thing that they did was as well, they used to go to art glass, particularly for herons, and they used to go as a group, so their purchasing power was greater. So they would buy in bulk, and then they would split up, and they would go their different ways. You know, they had a shop. I think it was in Albert Street, and Pat had the paper bags and stuff. You know, Dobbin's fruit shop and that. They moved back to Meath in the early 60s. So, but again, just another family there. So, a couple of other pictures there. This is probably more familiar. I think that's Cafe Havana. That's McCoy. I think it's called Cafe Havana now or something, isn't it? So it's, but that's Miller's Lane, and you'll see people from Omeath there as well. I mean, I'm saying people from Omeath, I'm surmising because just on the street directories you'll get the name, the surname, and then you'll get your occupation. In the census returns as well, you'll get the place of birth, County Louth, and so it's more than extremely likely, I think, that there would be Omeath people. Anyway, so, but you see again, so here's, you know, part of the clearances. This area was being, you know, sort of levelled. It's interesting, if you go to, I was in Liverpool a few years ago, and some very much younger brothers-in-law, and it was actually a stag weekend, and it was funny because you get through central Liverpool, and to me it seemed to be, this is how Belfast would have been, because you get still narrow streets with big tall red brick buildings, and you know, so they've retained a lot of that. But obviously in Belfast, where you know, you had the slum clearances and so on, then you had obviously in the Troubles as well, a lot of buildings destroyed and so on. It's more difficult to sort of to recreate the physical area in which people lived. So this is an interesting photograph from Smithfield, and this is the Irish Volunteers who were formed in late 1913. And it's an interesting photograph. There aren't that many photographs of the Irish Volunteers in Belfast, as far as I know. Certainly told us by the folks in the Ulster Museum who was doing this research, as I say, over 10 years ago now. But so just a couple of other photographs of Smithfield at the time. Okay, so oops. Okay, Sean McMuillan. So I mentioned Cathal O'Byrne. Sean McMuillan is our other big source and our most useful source for information about the Fadgies. McMuillan was born in 1884. He was from Glenariff. His father actually was a native Irish speaker. But Sean McMuillan was a young guy, say about 14, 15, so we're talking about 1898 or 1899 or so on. He started taking interest in Irish. He was an apprentice baker. And he came home with a book in Irish, and he said to his father, I'm learning Irish. And his father said, well, I'm a native speaker of Irish myself. You know, he didn't know, because it just didn't seem to be that important to his father at the time. But anyway, McWillan was a very enterprising guy. You can even see where he's pictured there. He lived around with Irish Drive off the Falls Road. Unlike the people we saw in the earlier photographs with big hats and all the rest of it, he was from a much more modest background. He was an apprentice baker, but he worked with a guy who was a Protestant colleague who had worked down in Gaeilge and encouraged him to go down there, and was very encouraging of his efforts to learn Irish as well. And what he said was that he used to drink with dealers down in Gaeilge, and that they taught him to say "Sláinte away, agus banner the vein." So good health and a woman of your choice, you know. So anyway, that was his introduction to the Irish language. But Sean McWillan took it upon himself to go down to Omeath. He travelled down as a basically a teenager, and sought out people in the district. And he went to a woman, Ellie Nianlon, who was elderly at this time. And what she said to him was, "Look, you should actually be talking to people in Belfast from Omeath." And she gave various names of people. Her brother was one. Her brother was an old sailor, a merchant seaman, and he was full of all sorts of stories. When McWillan went back to Belfast, he sought people like that out, and he used to go and learn songs from them and stories and so on. But Owen O'Hanlon was an interesting character, because one of the stories is he talked about being in the West Indies and hearing red-haired black people speak Irish. Now, that might seem a wee bit funny at first hearing, but there was, of course, the island of Montserrat, where Irish people were sent after the Cromwellian wars, and there is this mixing of Irish with the African slaves there. So there's actually somebody who is doing a study of the type of language that they speak there, and the traces of Irish that are there. So anyway, Montserrat, that's probably the place he was talking about. But Sean McWillan, as I say, was very, very enterprising. He also got to know a woman who was called Ellie Iwerrigan, and she worked in St George's Market. And that's just at the top. You see, just the reason why I'm showing you this picture of St George's Market is because you have the crest in Irish, Lau Yarrig Éireann, the Red Hand of Ireland. And I'd say this comes from the Ulster Journal of Archaeology. The cover of it has a similar crest and sort of a legend underneath it. You see that was used by the Ulster Bank as well. So the Merchant Hotel, you'll see it there. You'll see it, the Lisburn Road Ulster Bank, you'll see it in Bangor, the Ulster Bank there. So interesting just to see, in the built environment, that you had some. And you also have some Irish as well outside the City Hall in some of the statues. So anyway, what Sean McWillan did was he used to go into this woman called Ellie Iwerrigan on a Saturday, and he used to learn songs from her. Now, on one particular Saturday morning, the Saturdays were quieter, so he used to learn these songs. And one particular Saturday morning, she was singing this song called Patron Chileva, which is the Caoilí pattern. The pattern day was a big feast day, where it was basically like St Patrick's Day, where people went crazy, and that's why the church kind of sort of stopped the pattern days, because they ended up, it was just kind of, drinking debauchery and this type of thing. However, this song talks about a group of orange men from Portadown who came up, and there was a big ruckus anyway. But while Ellie Iwerrigan was singing this song, Sean McWillan noticed that there were people going by giving them what he seemed to think were dirty looks, and he says, some people aren't appreciating your song here, whatever, this sort of thing. And she said, "I'm not on a bother about them. I could thatch St George's Market with £5 notes." So that's interesting, because what she's saying is, look, I'm made money basically. I don't have to sort of curry favour with anybody. I could thatch St George's Market with £5 notes. And the thing about the Omeath people, some of them were quite wealthy, very wealthy. One person in particular, the earliest person that I see anyway, who sort of really established himself in Belfast, was Stephen Marley, and he ended up owning various shops in Belfast. Now, this woman, Ellie Iwerrigan, talks about Stephen Marley's mother, and she says, she told Sean McWillan, "I'm worried about her because she's, she hasn't got long left, and the thing is, she has nobody to hear her confession, because she couldn't hear her confession in any other language." So it goes back to the point I was saying earlier about the way the priests, in industrial cities where there were Irish immigrants, that this was one of the big demands was for Irish speaking priests who could hear confessions. So it shows you as well, you know, the fact that you had somebody there who you know, which her description was that she didn't really have much English, you know, that somebody, you know, at that time, that would have been the early 20th century, because it gives you an idea of you know, how sort of intergenerational the decline of Irish. We heard earlier about the 1890s that the young people weren't speaking, but certainly the older generation would have been, some of them, you know, their English wouldn't have been great as well. So, but anyway, Sean McMillan is our big source for the Fadgies. He also talks about Marquis Street, which is, if you know the back of Castle Court, where Madden's Bar is, Marquis Street is there, and there's the parochial house for St Mary's is also there as well. What he talks about was going there on a Saturday evening, and he said to be about 10 or 12 of the Omeath dealers sitting on the pavement, smoking their pipes, talking in Irish. So for Sean McMillan, you know, this is a guy who left school, as he did at that time, became an apprentice, but he had this great thirst of knowledge for the Irish language, and he had these people on his doorstep, literally. And so Sean McMillan learnt a lot of his Irish, as I say, from the people of Omeath. He went on to be a writer. He went on to work for the publishing, the state Irish publishing firm in Goom in Dublin. But as I say, in his memoirs he talks an awful lot about the people from Omeath in Belfast, the Fadgies. So, just a couple of photographs. I'm going to be finishing up in about 5 minutes or so. These, as I say, this photograph was taken about 1905. Again, you know, who's to know where this woman is from, but I'd say there's a pretty good chance that she was from Omeath. And I'll explain why I'm quite confident in a second. Just to give you an idea as well, this isn't a picture from Omeath. This is actually a picture from the Albert Kahn Institute. The amazing colour photographs were taken, you know, in the, I think this was taken about 1914, so you don't see many colour photographs from 1914. But this is the Claddagh in Galway, and these are fishways basically. And what the photographer said was that it was nearly impossible to keep these women quiet for the duration it took for the to take a photograph, because you had to stand like this, you know, in those days, like, and not move. But this was so difficult for him, because, and this is an important thing in my opinion anyway, the people from Omeath they definitely had the gift of the gab. When you read Sean McMillan's description of them, when you read his encounters, this is the thing that comes out. And I was down actually with the grandson of the last native speaker, Annie Hanlon, Sean O'Hanlon, down in Omeath, sometime called in, and he was, you know, saying the same thing, that the people from Omeath, that they had this great gift of the gab, that it was really important for them, because if you're a dealer, you can't be a wallflower, you have to be out talking and all the rest of it. It is kind of, as opposed to, I mentioned the Dale Boy Trotter thing, you know, you have to be able to speak, you have to be able to think on your feet, and this is a feature of them. So anyway, another picture here with a half door in Millfield. This is from a book that was published in the 1950s, and I'm thinking that the photograph is probably late 1940s, 1950s, and unless this woman is going to make a really big apple cake, I just wonder is she selling apples. But anyway, certainly you did have people from Omeath in Millfield as well. Thomas O'Hanlon that I mentioned, and this is where I'm going to finish up. Thomas O'Hanlon was the grandfather of Nan O'Hara that I mentioned earlier on. Nan O'Hara was the owner of Milady's Fruit Shop on the Falls Road, which is unfortunately no longer a fruit shop, but it's just basically opposite the Culterland and down a wee bit as you go out from the city. And Nan's grandfather, this is Thomas O'Hanlon. This is the man that, say, used to swap the soldiers their military boots for fruit and so on. You see even the way that he's dressed. He's got the sort of the dapper sort of dress as well. And Sean O'Hanlon was talking about his uncle, and he was saying, you know, this guy came in with a big fedora hat, with a big salmon under his arm, and he says, you know, and a bottle of whiskey, whatever it was. He says, with the phrase that he mentioned, they were larger than life. They had this presence and they were larger than life, you know. So anyway, Thomas O'Hanlon, you can see here his, I don't know, can you make it out as well as I can, as I'm standing closer to it, but this is the census return. And you see Thomas O'Hanlon, Bridget O'Hanlon, and you go across fishmonger, 44 in 1901, married, County Louth, and then the question on the Irish language, Irish and English. His wife, Bridget O'Hanlon, whose maiden name was Rice actually, again, County Louth, Irish and English. If you look at the rest of the column, then, you know, it's blank, right? So that's interesting because it shows that that this family anyway, when they came to Belfast, that the parents spoke Irish but they didn't pass it on to the children. The first two children were born in Louth, and the third one, Elizabeth, was born in Belfast, age 13, so you can work out as well, you know, more or less when they settled in Belfast. The next census turn here is Mick McKeown. Mentioned Millfield. This is Carrickhill. I think Millfield, Carrickhill. And he was a blind lodging housekeeper. It's hard to make this out, but you see again here, this question, Irish and English, blind here, but underneath English, and then it's stroked out for some reason, so there's even sort of a confusion. The reason why I have this was because Nan was explaining to me that Mick McKeown's lodging house was one of the places where the Meath people used to come to stay, and it was in Carrickhill, and particularly girls who were went in to work in big houses, you know, sort of as servants. So it wasn't just, I mean, the thing about it is, this was chain migration. People moved in stages. So you get, when you look at the census returns for people from Meath, you get very often at the bottom, brother-in-law and whatever family relation or something. So people stayed, a lot of people stayed between April and say October, and then others settled in Belfast, as I say, and had businesses and became quite prosperous. So, but this is Nan herself. Nan, when I was talking to her, she explained to me that it was one of these coincidences, really. I used to work in St Mary's College, a few doors up, really, and I went there every day to buy fruit, and I never thought, because the name my ladies, and just when I was starting to do this research, I said, do you have any connections in Meath? And she said, Meath? She says, we thought our mother didn't like us. She says, because at the start of every school holiday, we were sent to Meath, and we weren't allowed back until, you know, the school was open again, you know. She says, we spent all our time, all the spare time in Meath, and she was saying that there's this network of families, and what she said to me was that at one time, now she worked in this business from, I think she was born in 1920, she worked in that shop really for 74 years, you know, from she was 14, and so she was explaining to me that the Meath people were a very, very tight network, and that all of the people who were involved in fish and fruit in Belfast in her time were they were connected with Meath. I actually wrote an article about a year before I was talking to her in the Andersonstown News, put in the Andersonstown News, because I was hoping that there'd be some reaction and people would maybe come forward and say, oh, that's my granny, whatever, and get some information. And I said, you don't get the Andersonstown News? She says, no, I don't get the Andersonstown News because when I see the ads for the supermarkets, it puts me off, she says, you know, because I can't compete with them. So you can see, just, you know, the supermarkets are taking over and these small businesses were going. But anyway, Nan was able to talk to me about all of the people that I'd researched, the Marleys and so on. She had a lot of information about them all. The one thing that was clear, however, was that the break had been made with the Irish language. She said, you know, yes, my grandparents were great Irish speakers, and my grandfather, Irish scholars used to come and ask him, you know, the Irish for this, that and the other, and they talked about Meath Irish, but, you know, her mother wasn't given Irish. The interesting thing though, she says, I have learned a wee bit of Irish, she says, because there's an Irish school round the corner, and I've learned to say na janshin, you know, don't do that, you know, because now she was a great character. As I say, if you had spoken to Nan, you would have immediately got the idea of, you know, the gift of the gab, the gregarious sort of nature and all the rest of it, because I mean she could have, and in the nicest possible way, she could have bought you and sold you, but an extremely gentle kind of you know, dignified person, but at the same time she was, you know, totally switched on. When I was talking to her, she was in her, I think she was about 84 at this stage, you know, and this was a photograph taken by the Irish News, by the way. It was one of those photographs that they put in occasionally. But anyway, I think I've probably said it enough at this stage, and this would be a good time to ask Brendan to show us these photographs we're looking forward to. And but thanks everybody for listening, and hopefully we'll have maybe a short discussion if that's okay at the end. Okay. I've copies, by the way, of the book. I'm thinking about 8 or 9 copies. There are 8. The price is £8. So. Yeah, I've seen them before. That's it.
Yeah.
I'll stick my hand in it.
They might be giving me that. Yeah, that looks good. Sticking your hand in there.
Yeah? Yeah. So. Do you want to? Will I put them on? Then you can speak then and explain. So.
This is my grandfather Rice from the townland of Ardahi in Belfast, September 1932, about 45 years of age.
Okay. This is a great one here.
And that's my grandfather Gaeilge said his fruit shop at 105 Falls Road, facing the Dunville Park. I don't know exactly what year that was, but maybe in the 30s, 40s maybe.
So I'll put that one.
That's him as an older man outside the shop on Falls Road, facing the Dunville Park.
Yeah.
Be in the 60s probably there, I would say.
Right. What year did he die, your grandfather?
I think he died in 1966.
Right. Okay. There's another one here.
And that's him going round to St Peter's Pro Cathedral. He also lived and had a fruit shop at 162 Devon Street. And it's just round the corner there's St Peter's Pro Cathedral. That's him going off with his my Aunt Kathleen.
Right. Okay. I'll take one away and put one in there.
And this is a very interesting one here because it shows the area where he lived. You just see it. I found out that he came to Russell Square.
Move this, look, I think there's a wee bit of.
Yes.
That's very
No, sorry, Hamel Square here. And I wondered where Hamel Square was. And then it's off Lettuce Hill. And I wondered where Lettuce Hill was. And it's off Devon Street. Down near the bottom of Devon Street. And there's Barrack Street there. So this was another enclave of people. And I looked up, he came to Belfast about 1905 and searched and eventually found him as a boarder in this house in Hamel Square. And all of the people have County Louth boarders, and the husband and wife
there you go.
are all County Louth people.
Fantastic. That's fantastic because, you know, this is the thing, when I was explaining to Stephen earlier on, when I was doing my research, all of the census stuff was on the microfilm, so you had to go through street by street, and unless you had a steer on which street to look at, you'd have to go through more or less every street, you know. So, but now it's fantastic. You can put in a search, and you know, and you can even say, give me only, you know, County Louth, Bourne, whatever, you know. So, but that's it. Brent, thanks very much indeed. Is there anybody else, you know, because I've been giving these talks now for a while, and there's very often people come forward with new information. Is there anybody else who has any information or? Right, because I'm thinking maybe at some stage we might do a sort of an exhibition, because these are great photographs that you have there, Brendan, and we also have some photographs. There was a piece in the Irish News. Fortunately, I don't have that with me now, but I don't think I have it. Let me see. I just have it on a memory stick here, but I'll. This is one of my kids starting off. So you see, healthy eating. It's not me. It's homework or something, but. Yeah, now this, I don't think this is going to work. So anyway, doesn't matter. No, I'm not going to get it. But I'll explain to you anyway what it was. Yeah, sorry. What this was there was a photograph from the 1920s in North Street, and it's a couple of carts with fruit, and there's a couple of men standing, and there's girls beside it, and the Irish News were asking, it was sent by somebody in England, and they were saying, does anybody have any information about this? And I sort of rung them up and said, I think these are probably people from Omeath. And then at the talk that I gave in Omeath, there was a guy who came forward there, Eugene McNulty I think his name was, but anyway, these were relatives of his, and they were indeed originally from Omeath. The other thing I should say as well, some years ago I gave a talk in Omeath, it was 2008, and there was a man there called Johnny Hardy who was very interesting. He's since died unfortunately, but Johnny owned a fish shop, I think it was in Blackpool, and what he was explaining to me was that at one time all the English coastal towns had shops owned by people from Omeath, and so he was, Sean O'Hanlon a few weeks ago was saying to me that the school actually used to get off for 3 weeks when people went to Blackpool. So they went to Blackpool on the Isle of Man, so sort of en masse people went from Omeath to sail and then come back, So so anyway, that's all I'm going to say. I guess Arish got a meal of Thanks very much.